I'd really like to welcome everybody this evening. I'm Debbie Colombo-Sanders, Vice President for the Board of Education, and we have some wonderful candidates we're anxious to hear from tonight. I'd also like to turn it over to Don Santiago-Marullo, our superintendent, who will introduce and go into detail more of the budget. The budget was looked over, reviewed by the board. We approved it. We're really thrilled about it. We brought in a whole lot more of the positions that we know the district needs, and we were able to, in some of the sections, for the longest time, we were relying on the boosters pretty heavily for some of our freshman sports. At this point, we felt it was important that we retain these activities for our students, and we allocated funding through the district to keep them going. We recognized that there was a need for a girls' golf team, and we brought that in, along with several other of the positions that Dr. Santiago-Marullo will be introducing to you this evening. So once again, thank you, and I hope you get all your questions answered.
Good evening, and thank you. All right, so 2016-2017 budget. This budget is actually, it was a difficult budget to put together for many reasons. We still are, and you'll see that in a future slide, we're still trying to recover from great losses in state education aid. We are thrilled that the gap elimination adjustment was ended in this state budget, but it took a while to get there, and so you'll see that there's also some monies that we've lost along the way in those categories. But I feel good about what we put together. I think that it is going to represent what our students need, and we're going to continue to do good things for our students because of the decisions that we made together, the board and I. So let me start by telling you, this is a story that only half a dozen school districts in the state can actually tell, and that's the fact that we are a district that has been growing at a pretty rapid rate. From 2008 to 2016, we have added 520 students to Victor Central Schools. The reason that that's an important thing to recognize is that in 2007-2008, the state education department, the state government froze the demographic data that's used to calculate what's called foundation aid. That's one of the largest aid formulas that tell school districts what they're going to actually get in state aid for our following year. Because they froze that, we get no foundation aid for these 520 students, and that's a significant loss to the district. At the same time, the majority of the districts in the state, as I mentioned, are not growing. They're either flat or they're declining. Well, those states also have their demographic data frozen, so they're getting state aid on children they no longer have. It doesn't seem fair, but it is the way that the system is working now. We've done a lot of advocacy on this in Albany. We talked to our elected officials. We will continue to do advocacy because we still need them to really revisit this formula and try to understand what's the reality, the current reality in our school systems, and where is the need and what needs to change. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through, because that's where you're going to see some pretty large pockets of money that we were underfunded, and that's because of that specific reason. The reason is that we're a thriving organization and we're a thriving community, which are both good things. I have colleagues, especially in school districts to the east of me, who, because of their declining enrollment, they're really struggling and they're wondering, what's the future for their organization, what's the future for their community. So if we're going to have one battle or another to fight, this is the one I'd prefer. I'd rather be part of a thriving community. Okay, so here's the state aid history, and what you're going to see here is a pretty big number, almost $70 million. And that's the cumulative effect of that frozen foundation aid. And that problem has not been solved. As you can see, we're still short $7 million in aid this year. If we had received that aid, the story of this budget would be completely different. The good news is you'll see across from in the next column, across from the 2016-2017 estimate, there is a dash. With the state budget, the legislature approving a state budget this year, they have ended the gap elimination adjustment. And what that was a formula that was devised in order to bring New York State back into a place where we were in a healthier place fiscally. So every state organization wound up losing some type of funding. However those organizations were funded, the formulas would run, and then a dollar amount would be decided, and then they would take and deduct a large amount of that money in order to bring the budget into line where it needed to be. Well, it started off, as you can see, the first couple of, well, actually almost 3 years there, it was over $2.5 million, $3 million. And then you see the numbers actually dropping off, and that's of course when things got to get improved a little bit in the economy, and so there was some additional revenue sources for the state to allocate monies. What we are thrilled about, because at the beginning of the budget process, the governor did not, in fact, eliminate the gap elimination adjustment, which we call the GEA. He only proposed funding it for Victor at about a third of what was left in the deduction of the GEA. We're thrilled that the legislators, who at the beginning of their budget process said, this is going this year, it's going to disappear. And they actually followed through on that promise, and that worked out very well for Victor, because we were able to get, as you can see, almost $800,000 in additional aid this year. So, let me tell you a little bit about the budget history of Victor Central Schools. We are a conservative school district. We've been a conservative school district for a long, long time. And that is something that I know our taxpayers appreciate when it comes time to pay that property tax bill. But it's also one of those things that puts us in a really difficult position when we are talking about a tax cap, which the state of New York now has. Because the tax cap actually limits you on the percentage of the levy that you're able to access in order to run your budget in each of our school years. If we had a larger levy amount, then the percentage that we would be getting would be a larger amount, but we don't. And it's unfortunate, but it is where we are. So what we've tried to do is what we think is best for our students. And you'll see that each year when we think about how much of percentage increase, and this is the budget to budget increase, we think the community will support. And for this year, we're projecting a 1.77% increase. You can see it is a little lower than some of the other years, not as low as some of the past years, but it's a reasonable place for us to be to make that next big step in trying to either bring back programming or add programming that's appropriate for us to do now for the students that we have and the needs that we have. So just to give you a big overview of the increases and the decreases, so this is sort of a big picture view. The state of New York requires that we divide our budget into 3 categories: administrative, program, and capital. Under administrative is, in fact, an administrative team, but there are also other things under administrative, things such as our curriculum writing, textbooks, some of those things that are district-wide and that are not necessarily touching kids directly. Program is really the meat of and heart sort of our programming, and that's where we have all of our teachers, teacher aides, building support with our students. Capital is really the facilities, and then it's also our debt. Every time we build we do a capital project, we take on what is in essence a mortgage. They're not called that, but it's what it is. And that mortgage that we get is then paid at a 60 to 70% rate. That is paid by the state, so we receive state aid as long as we hold the mortgage. Well, you'll see the $1.2 million reduction we have this year in state aid, in the capital budget. That's because we have some of what we call our debt service. That mortgage is coming off. So we won't be spending that money, but we also won't be receiving that money from the state, so it sort of zeroes out. But it will drop that budget area by a significant amount. So the budget that we are proposing, and you can see the total amount here is $65.1 million. It represents a 1.77% budget-to-budget increase. Okay, so this is what people are generally interested in when you're talking about our budgets. What is going to be new? What is going to happen? And how are we going to address some of the needs that we've had? Those first few years from 2008-9 through to 2013 or so, every year you saw we had really large deductions in state aid. So the conversations were not about what are we going to add, they were about what do we have to cut. And we did that, and we were very thoughtful about doing that. We tried to make the best decisions we could, but it really wasn't an easy process to go through. 3 years, this will be the 3rd year actually, so 3 years ago, we actually received a little more state aid. And it wasn't very much, but it was so exciting to actually get more state aid rather than less state aid that we were thrilled. And so we started to rebuild, and we started to evaluate and try to understand what we might need in the following year and how should we use those monies. This year, We did get the rest of the GEA, but with the CPI, the consumer price index being so low, and I'll share that with you in a minute. Actually, do I have it in here? Yes. And on a future slide, I'll share to you how the tax levy cap is calculated. It just wasn't going to be enough. And so we knew that we really would have to take that big step this year and exceed the cap. And so what we decided to do is we said, okay, well, let's look at what we really need and what will that impact be on the community, balance out the needs of our students and staff with the needs of our community. And so this is the proposal we're bringing to you. These are the positions that we would like to add. So we are budgeting for an additional kindergarten teacher. The kindergarten number is the one that fluctuates the most for us because year to year it's very difficult for us to predict that. We have a demographic report that we conduct every year. We have a consultant conduct every year. And in the past, when the economy was not as bad off as it has been for the last 6-7 years, it was fairly accurate. We could pretty much count on that. We saw the trending of our classes growing. Over the last few years, it has fluctuated by about 40 points, both high and low. And that's a very difficult thing to plan for. And that's what happened to us last year. They had told us that we were going to land around 270 kindergartners. We didn't. We came in over 300. So those class sizes are a little large. What we did last year, and this was by a request from the principal in the Early Childhood Center, Dorothy Angela, is we took some funding that we had set aside just in case that were to happen, and we added aid time to those teachers' rooms. They in the past had teacher aid time for ELA, English Language Arts Instruction. We added teacher aid time for when they did math instruction. And that was okay, but it didn't really solve the problem long term. So we are budgeting for a kindergarten teacher, and you'll see it says subject to enrollment. I checked the enrollment today, and as of today we have 251 kindergartners. So that's substantially lower than what, our projected number for this coming year is 270. So we don't know where we'll end, but we do know that we will be registering kindergartners not only straight through to the first day of school, but into the school year. But sometime in July, we're going to need to make a decision about whether we hire this position or not. We're hiring a science teacher for the senior high school. They have had an increase in the number of students that are actually taking sciences, especially the upper level sciences, chemistry and physics, so we want to meet that need. We are going to be adding a school counselor to the intermediate school. There are 1,000 children in that building, and we have one guidance counselor. And that's actually been the model for that building for quite a while, but things have changed. Back when there was probably about 600-700 kids in that building and we only had one guidance counselor, that person's role was different than it is now. And so we really think it's important to add a guidance counselor to that building. We are adding a special education teacher at the junior high school, and that's, again, to help us with some programming changes that we want to do around consultant teacher work. We are adding 2 what are called instructional coaches. We currently have 2 of those coaches in our pre-K through 6 programming. We have one in English Language Arts and one in mathematics. But they are working with about 250 teachers, so that's a pretty large group of folks. So we decided to add another English Language Arts and another math coach. And those 4 people will be working with our elementary programming from pre-K to 6. Next, we have it's called a boost teacher. It's all capitals, but it's not an acronym. We're actually using the English language word boost. And that's a program that was developed by the high school administration at the high school to support those students who might be at risk of not graduating. It's so important these days to get that high school diploma, and so we wanted to do everything we could. And those teachers they're working with students who are not special education students, because we have other services that we can use with special education students. And it's been a very successful program. I just had somebody just a few minutes ago say to me, that was a great program for my daughter. And we know that it is a good program. And it's because of the fact that the high school has grown very rapidly as well. In the early 2000s, we had class sizes of about 200 that were graduating from Victor High School. This year, all of them are over 300, and several of them are over 340. So that's a substantial change in the number of students that are in the high school. That also means that there's going to be a little bit higher percentage of kids who may be at risk of not graduating. So we wanted to make sure we added some staffing there. We are adding another part-time English language learner teacher. Some of you may remember that we added a full-time teacher last year. And let me take just a second. That was because the mandates on how English language learning instruction takes place has changed. This is what we used to be called ESOL, or English for speakers of other languages, English as a second language. There's a lot of acronyms around this program. The ELL now stands for English Language Learners. In other words, that is going to be not their native tongue, their second, possibly more, right? Some folks come to us knowing multiple languages, but not English. That program and the mandates that were started this past school year have just required that we add additional staffing. So that's an example of a position that we never even thought about, and we certainly didn't reduce 4 or 5 years ago, but we now need. We have almost doubled the number of students that are in our school system over the last few years in this program. We have some amazing teachers, and we're very fortunate to have them because this is now a shortage area in New York State because of the new mandates. So we've been fortunate to be able to fill those positions. We're going to be adding a .6 teacher at a math teacher at the junior high, again for an increased enrollment. And then the next 2 positions are part-time positions. They're going to be similar to the instructional coaches that I just described. Because of the Common Core standards, all of our Regents exams are going to be shifting. Some have already begun to shift, and then the rest will be shifting over the next few years. And we find ourselves that we need some teacher leadership in that area to support the administrators as those changes are made. We currently have a .6, which means that somebody who teaches 2 classes and then has the rest of her full-time schedule devoted to being a standards leader in English. We have another one in math, and then we would like to add 1 in social studies and 1 in science. That will cover us for the majority of those Regents exam changes. There used to be some other exams like foreign language, but those are actually no longer offered in New York State, so that's why we're not looking at some of those other areas right now. Okay, that's some instructional additions. Under non-instructional, and this is an area that has actually been a little neglected only because, everybody sort of said, okay, we'll tighten our belts and we'll try to keep the cuts as far away from the kids as we can. But we find ourselves at the point now where we really need to make a different choice. So we are going to be adding a full-time nurse to the campus. We currently have 6 nurses, 5, 1 in each of the schools, and then a 6th nurse who works in all of the schools in some capacity or another during a week, supporting those school-based nurses. And we'd like to add a 2nd nurse. That will allow us to have 4 nurses in pre-K through 6, 1 in each of the 3 buildings, and then 1 nurse that works with those 3 nurses, and then 3 nurses in the junior high, 1 in each of the schools, and then a nurse that is shared between the 2 of them. We have 1,400 students in our high school, 700 students in our junior high school. We think that that's a reasonable thing for us to do, is to try to adjust the staffing in that area in order to make sure that things remain safe. The cleaners, we've added a great deal of space since 2007, 2008, and we had just recently brought the cleaning department, the maintenance department, up to where they were prior to that, because along the way we cut quite a few positions in that area. And so what we're asking to do there is to add 2 more full-time positions. It doesn't bring them nearly to where they need to be, but it certainly will help long-term to have those positions. And then the last item is really, again, another one of those needs. We knew that for a few years now that we've needed. As we've continued to grow, so has the traffic on our campus. And unfortunately, there are those folks who decide that they don't have to follow the rules, and they really make situations that are pretty unsafe happen around our buildings and on our campus. So we're going to be hiring some part-time staffing in that area. The idea is that those folks would work at arrival for a few hours and then at dismissal for a few hours, which is the time where we're the most concerned because our students are leaving the buildings. Actually, they're leaving the buses and coming into our buildings, or they're leaving the buildings and coming into getting onto our buses or are being transported by their families. So those are brand new positions to the district, but we think that they're going to help a lot with the traffic patterns and the folks following the rules, helping us to help supervise that happening. And then the last is an extracurricular position that we're adding, and that is we are going to add girls varsity coach. This is a team that has been requested by the athletics department for 3 years, this being the 3rd year that they requested it. The first couple of years we said no, we really need to prioritize some more of the instructional staffing, and this year we decided that we would in fact add this team. As I mentioned earlier, we have so many more students now at the secondary level, and we have not added a team in quite a few years at Victor Central School. So those are our staffing increases. Let me tell you a little bit about the tax cap, because this is really the legislation that has made it very challenging for not only school districts, but other municipalities, villages, towns, and counties to put together budgets. It was enacted in 2011. It was an idea that Governor Cuomo had in order to try to reduce property taxes in New York State. I mean, that was his goal. He wanted the state to be a little friendlier, to attract business to the state, and decided that he would take the idea of a tax cap, which is used in a couple other states. I know Massachusetts has one. They're different though than what we wound up enacting, but they have them. So they call it the 2% tax cap, but that's really not accurate. It is a formula, it has about a dozen steps to it, where you have to take funding from our budget and put it in and take it out and divide and multiply, and it's pretty complex. It's so complex that even though we have an experienced business official, Mr. Vistoco, who does the lion's share of putting this budget together for us, the state came and audited his ability to run that formula for us as a district, and they're doing that in every district, all 700 districts. But it's that complex that they needed to audit us. It's kind of when you think about that, you think, really, is that what we're spending our time doing? Is coming up with these ways to manipulate our formulas? But anyway, in the past, Victor Central Schools actually had a tax cap that was in the 3% plus. And so that's why we never asked you in the past to exceed the tax cap. We were in a position where we thought, you know what, that's a good amount of money for us to add to the budget. Those are good positions that we can add, and that's good work that we can do with our students, and we'll see what the next year brings. But one of the numbers, one of the multipliers in that formula is the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. And this year, the CPI was 0.12, it was almost 0. And that meant that we just weren't going to get a final number that was going to be adequate. We wound up with a tax cap that is 1.77%. By the way, that number is not at all related to the fact that the budget-to-budget increase is 1.7%. That actually almost never happens. It did this time. It did, and it was one of those things where I kept going back to Mike and going, wait, is this right? And he's like, trust me, it's right. So what we are asking as far as the levy, what we'd like to ask is that we take a 3.96% increase on the levy. Because that is above the number 1.77%, we have to, the budget has to pass with the supermajority. 60% of the voters that day, will need to vote yes if we are to exceed the cap, if we're going to be able to exceed the cap. And because we exceeded the cap, Governor Cuomo enacted a couple of years later, not in 2011 when he first put this in place, but a couple of years later, a check that people get, a tax rebate. And you may be familiar with that if you're a homeowner. The first year it came just in time for the election, just to remind us of his generosity. This past year though, it's taken, I don't even know if they're done, but it's taken about 6 months for those checks to be delivered. So I'm not sure why it's taken that long, but it does seem to be something that the state is struggling with. But our voters in the Victor Central School District will not be eligible for that rebate check in the fall if we in fact pass this budget because we had exceeded the tax cap. To remind you a little bit about where we are at as a district, I mentioned earlier we are a very conservative school district, and because of that we have some pretty interesting numbers, pretty different from our neighbors. So this is the 2015-16 true value tax rate. This is the per $1,000 amount that you paid for the assessed value of your home. And you'll see that Victor is at $16.22. That was the tax rate last year, this current year. The other bars in yellow are in numerical order, and they range from $19.02 to $30.20. There are people in our community who their per $1,000 rate is $30, almost twice what we are charging our residents. Underneath are the districts. I'll read those for you because I know they're not as easy to read in the back of the room. They are in alphabetical order. The bars do not correspond to the list as I read it. If you're interested in knowing which one is which, you certainly can visit their websites and investigate that, but it's not our interest to share information about other districts. We just want to do some comparative, do some comparisons around these numbers, and there's another chart I'll show you in a minute. So Victor, $16.22. The other bars represent Bloomfield, Brighton, Canandaigua, East Arundecoit, Fairport, Honeoye Falls, Lima, Manchester, Shortsville, Palmyra, Macedon, Penfield, Pittsford, Victor, Webster, and West Arundecoit. So those are that's the company that we keep, and you can see how reasonable our actual tax rate is. This is the other number that we want to share with you, and that is what we are estimating the true tax rate to be next year versus the historical data. And you will see that every year, in yellow is the estimated rate, and for every year, except for the coming school year, in blue is the actual tax rate. Mr. Vistocco is very, very good at what he does. He always estimates a tax rate that is conservative. I know I keep using that word, but it's true. We certainly wouldn't want to estimate a number and then have it turn out to be higher. So people would, I think, be pretty upset and feel like they that we had misrepresented ourselves. So you'll notice that every single year, going back to, and it goes back even further, we just chose to do just a handful of states so you can actually see the numbers in the bars. The tax rate has actually been lower. And in the case of last year, it was significantly lower. When the final assessments were calculated in August, we wound up giving our community a 1.6% negative tax rate, which was great for those people who wanted to see their taxes go down. But it gives you a sense of what's happening with this tax cap and how it really is impacting not just school districts, but certainly that's the one we're interested in tonight. So we are predicting that with this 3.96% increase of the tax levy, the override that we're asking you to do, that your tax rate will be 0.64%, just above a 0.5% increase, or possibly less. Because our track record has been that, that number tends to be a little conservative. This is the true tax rate history, and I mentioned that the rate this past year was $16.21. So we're going to show you, I just want to share with you the increase, and what we're saying is it's going to go up to $16.32. It's that 0.64% increase. But when you look at historically back to 2000, 2008, you'll also notice that it's not a significant increase. It's an increase over last year, but that's because last year the tax cap impacted us in a negative way, and the rate dropped. It's still lower than 2014-15. So the tax rate for the 16-17 school year will be lower than what you were paying in the last 2 school years. And then the other data that I want to share with you is our per pupil expenditure number, and that is that Victor Central Schools, we are actually, out of 700 school districts, we are at the bottom of the list in what we spend per pupil, and that's $9,400. The average in the state is $13,900. So there's certainly a gap there. So again, when I've been talking to our community members and I've been saying to them, yes, we're asking you to exceed the cap. Yes, we know that means you won't get that rebate check. But we also want you to understand that we've done a really good job being fiscally responsible with the monies that you've given us to date. And so our hope is that you'll continue to trust that what we are asking you for is what we need, and it's what is best for our students and our staff as we prepare our young people in our community for their futures. So this is a comparison of local districts and their per pupil expenditure. As you'll see in the chart, of course, Victor is $9,400 per student. Again, the numbers in the bars, yellow bars, are numerical order. The school districts on the bottom are in alphabetical order. The next lowest amount is $10,800, and it runs up to $14,244. The districts, again, I'll remind you, are Bloomfield, Brighton, Canandaigua, East Arundecoit, Fairport, Honeywell Falls, Lima, Manchester, Shortfield, Palmyra, Macedon, Penfield, Pittsford, Victor, Webster, and West Arundecoit. So it's some pretty good company that we're keeping there, and we've been able to do some pretty good things with our students in preparing them for their future, and we're doing it at a much lower rate. This is a chart that we've decided to add to the presentation. I showed this for the first time last year because I think it's also important for people to understand that some of the districts in the area actually benefit from shared sales tax. Monroe County is one of those districts, one of those counties. Wayne County also is. So you'll see little Victor down there. We have that little tiny slice of blue because we do actually get some income, some sales tax revenue from Monroe County and some from Wayne County because there are some slivers of the district that are in those two counties. So they have to, they figure out a per capita number and they actually have to give us some of their sales tax. But those districts that are solidly in Monroe County, you can see the kind of dollars that they're getting. Our budget is going up by $1.3 million, I think it was. I should memorize that first number, but if we were getting even the lowest amount, the $3 million that Brighton is getting, we wouldn't have to raise our budget this year. We wouldn't have had to increase our taxes. We certainly wouldn't be in the position of asking you to exceed the tax cap. But that's not a reality. The reality is we don't get sales tax from Ontario County, and so therefore we have to find other ways to fund our programming. So I'll say thank you, and are there any questions? Yes, Carol.
Just a question on the 2.6, the security obviously you need money that could be in instruction.
Yeah, don't get me started, because I agree.
Parents and families can't follow rules.
Yeah, I agree.
But my fear is that they're not going to have any authority. You know, it's like, are we wasting money because
No.
people are still going to ignore the?
No, we are, you know, Mr. Ha, our Director of Human Resources, is confident that he will be able to put some folks in these positions that actually, while they may not have any formal authority, will have the ability to manage the traffic on our campus. And we certainly will still have, although only half-time, but we will still have our school resource officer. If somebody really is going to be obnoxious enough to, even when asked by one of our staff members not to do something or to do a particular thing in order to keep our students safe, they choose not to, we certainly could engage Dyson Williamson, our school resource officer, in that process. So we will do that. But no, our thought is that we're hopefully going to be able to get folks that we think are going to be able to do this job and do it well. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't want to waste the money, but at the same time, I don't want anybody else to get hurt. As you know, one of our teachers got hurt last year. So it's time for us to be able, you know, to do this in order to hopefully keep folks from, you know, not doing what they're not supposed to be doing, right? Doing what they're not supposed to be doing, right? Any other questions? Okay, well, you know what? You know how to reach me. My email, my telephone number are on the website. If something comes up, you have a question, driving home, you think of something, feel free to contact us. We'd be more than happy to answer your question for you. I'm going to turn the program over now to, I believe it's Carol Prescott and Cindy Riley. They are presidents of our parents organization, and they are going to be mistresses of ceremony tonight.